Welcome back to Smart Zone Knowledge Hub. In this special video series, we're testing your knowledge on some of the most fascinating, fun, and curious facts from U.S. election history. Get ready for a multiple-choice quiz that'll challenge you with incredible stories behind the candidates and campaigns that shaped America. Let's dive into part one. Which U.S. presidential election was decided by the House of Representatives after an electoral tie? 1800. This election ended in a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, leading to 36 rounds of voting in the House before Jefferson was declared the winner. It resulted in the 12th Amendment, which changed the way electoral votes were cast. Who was the first woman to run for U.S. president? Victoria Woodhull. Woodhull ran for president in 1872 under the Equal Rights Party, a milestone for women's rights in the U.S., although she didn't gain many votes. In which election did newspapers famously declare the wrong winner with the headline "Dewey defeats Truman"? 1948. In one of the greatest upsets in U.S. election history, Harry Truman won despite being widely expected to lose to Thomas Dewey. The Chicago Tribune prematurely printed the now iconic incorrect headline. Which president won the most votes ever in a presidential election? Joe Biden. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden received more than 81 million votes, the highest number ever for a U.S. presidential candidate. Which election was decided by just 537 votes in Florida? 2000. The 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore was one of the closest in U.S. history. A controversial recount in Florida ended with Bush winning the state and the presidency by just 537 votes. Who was the first U.S. president to win re-election after being defeated in a previous election? Grover Cleveland. Cleveland is the only president to serve two non-consecutive terms, winning the presidency in 1884 and 1892. Which president lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College in 1888? Benjamin Harrison. In 1888, Harrison lost the popular vote to Cleveland by over 90,000 votes, but won the presidency through the Electoral College. Which election saw the first televised presidential debate? The 1960 debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon were the first ever televised presidential debates and are credited with boosting Kennedy's popularity. Which president was the first to campaign by traveling across the country by train? Harry S. Truman. During the 1948 campaign, Truman embarked on a whistle-stop train tour across the country, delivering speeches and meeting voters in small towns. Which U.S. president was elected to 4 terms, making him the longest-serving president in U.S. history? Franklin D. Roosevelt. FDR was elected to an unprecedented 4 terms, 1932, 1936, 1940, and 1944, during the Great Depression and World War II. His long tenure led to the 22nd Amendment, limiting presidents to 2 terms. Which U.S. presidential election had the first ever use of paper ballots? 1884. By 1884, the use of paper ballots was becoming common in elections. Prior to that, voters often voted verbally or with physical tokens. Who was the youngest person ever elected U.S. president? John F. Kennedy. At 43 years old, JFK became the youngest person elected president in 1960, though Theodore Roosevelt was younger when he assumed office after McKinley's assassination. Which U.S. election was the first to allow all citizens in every state to vote for president? 1824. In 1824, all states allowed their citizens to vote for president, although many still restricted the vote to white men who owned property. Which U.S. president won re-election with the largest popular vote margin in history? Ronald Reagan. In 1984, Reagan won re-election with 58.8% of the popular vote, defeating Walter Mondale in one of the most lopsided elections in U.S. history. Which U.S. election was the first to be broadcast live on the radio? 1920. The 1920 election between Warren G. Harding and James Cox was the first to be covered live by radio broadcasts, changing how Americans followed elections. Which U.S. president made the first radio broadcast from the White House during his campaign? Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge was the first president to use radio for his campaign in the 1924 election, revolutionizing how politicians communicated with the public. Which U.S. president was the first to visit all 50 states during a presidential campaign? Richard Nixon. During the 1960 campaign, Nixon became the first presidential candidate to visit every state, showing the growing importance of national campaigning. Which U.S. election was the first to have a live televised election night? 1952. The 1952 election between Dwight D. Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson was the first to feature a live televised election night broadcast, giving viewers instant results. Which U.S. president delivered his inaugural address on live television for the first time? John F. Kennedy. In 1961, JFK's inaugural address was the first to be broadcast live on television, reaching millions of Americans and emphasizing the power of media in politics. Which election resulted in the first African-American U.S. president? 2008. Barack Obama made history in 2008 as the first African-American president, inspiring millions and marking a significant milestone in U.S. politics. And that wraps up part 1 of our U.S. election history quiz. How did you do? Be sure to share your score in the comments and don't forget to tune in for part 2, where we'll dive into more fascinating, curious, and fun facts. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss it. See you in part 2.